You're tuned into Zero Signal Shorts, a show where we dig into the odd files, forgotten experiments, and real-world mysteries that sound too strange to be true, but are. I'm David Green, and every short episode we pull one story from the archives and break it down fast. What happened, why it mattered, and what it says about us today. If you like the deeper dives, remember, we post our full-length episodes every Tuesday at 6 a.m. For now, let's jump into today's signal. This one comes straight out of the 1990s Air Force lab, and a memo that somehow turned into one of the weirdest headlines in military history.
In the long history of war, it may have been one of the craziest, downright laughable ideas, a so-called gay bomb.
The idea was that if soldiers suddenly all became irresistible to one another, that unit morale and cohesion would break down and the enemy would be unable to resist.
The idea of a non-lethal chemical bomb containing aphrodisiacs was among nearly 200 proposals the Pentagon received in 1994, this one from an Air Force lab in Ohio. It pitched what it called a distasteful but completely non-lethal example, especially if the chemical also caused homosexual behavior. The Defense Department says it had all the ideas reviewed and that the gay bomb proposal was among those not making the cut. The Pentagon released a statement saying it never investigated the concept. It was just one individual putting together a concept paper with a variety of examples that were rejected. But members of the California watchdog group Sunshine Project don't buy that.
When the Pentagon says that they rejected this proposal, it's simply not true. And we have the facts to demonstrate that they've continued to think about it and to consider it in the years since it was first raised.
In San Francisco's Castro district, the idea of a gay bomb, whether considered or not, was good for some laughs.
Do they really think that, that faced with, guns and, being killed, they're really going to choose sex?
People still have such a misunderstanding of sexuality in general, not just homosexuality, but sexuality in general, that they think that it could be used as a weapon. When has that ever worked?
It was 1994, the middle of a strange intermission in American military history. The Cold War was over, the Soviet Union was gone, and the Pentagon was trying to figure out what comes next. The Wright Laboratory in Dayton, Ohio, an Air Force research center, better known for aerodynamics and propulsion, was told to start thinking about the future of non-lethal warfare. Non-lethal was the new buzzword of the decade. Policymakers wanted weapons that could disable enemies without killing them, something that sounded humane and politically acceptable. Inside the lab, a small team of researchers started writing a 3-page proposal called Harassing, Annoying, and Bad Guy Identifying Chemicals. It was a brainstorming document, a wish list of chemical tricks that might disrupt an enemy force. There were ideals about bad-smelling gases, markers that could stain uniforms, sprays that would attract stinging insects, and irritant that would make people sneeze uncontrollably. In the middle of this list was one extraordinary suggestion, a chemical that would release strong aphrodisiacs, especially if the chemical affected male behavior. It was a bureaucratic language for a wild thought that a gas bomb could make enemy soldiers too distracted or perhaps too enamored with one another to fight.
The role of base defense requires the use of non-lethal techniques backed by the threat of lethal force. Tech Sergeant Steve German introduces us to an interesting non-lethal weapon, the active denial system.
That single line would eventually become famous when the document was uncovered years later. Journalists nicknamed it the gay bomb. It is important to pause here. That was not an official name. It was never a project title or a code word. The phrase was invented by reporters and immediately recognized as offensive. It reduces sexuality as a weapon. When we use the term today, it's only as a quotation from the historical record, not an endorsement. The real story is not about sexuality. It's about the strange ways military imagination sometimes runs ahead of science and ethics. The Wright Laboratory proposal estimated a budget of $7.5 million over 6 years. It was one of the dozens of non-lethal concepts floating through the Pentagon at that time. The document was typed, stamped, and filed away. Perhaps it was never discussed again. A decade later, a small watchdog organization called the Sunshine Project was investigating U.S. chemical and biological research. Through a Freedom of Information Act request, they asked for any Air Force files about non-lethal chemicals. The Air Force sent them the Wright Lab proposal. When the Sunshine Project staff read, they were stunned. It sounded like satire. but it was real. They scanned the pages, uploaded them, and sent copies to reporters. In 2005, the story exploded. The U.S. military once considered building a gay bomb, read the headlines. BBC News, Wired, The Guardian, and CBS all confirmed the document's authenticity. The Pentagon spokesman explained that it had never been funded, but the internet had found its next legend. To understand how anyone could have written such a proposal, we have to understand the scientific background they thought they were drawing on. During the 80s and 90s, research on pheromones, the invisible chemical messengers that guide animal behavior, was everywhere. Insects and mammals were known to use pheromones for mating and territorial signals. Popular culture seized on the discovery. Perfume companies began advertising pheromone sprays that supposedly made wearers irresistible. Lifestyle magazines published stories about the chemistry of attraction. In that climate, a military scientist looking for novel ways to disable an opponent might wonder whether chemistry could interfere with human behavior. If moths could be guided by scent, why not men? The flaw in that logic is that humans are not moths. Our organs, the structure animals use to detect pheromones, is most vestigial. Human attraction depends on far more than smell. It's a complex cocktail of sight, voice, hormones, culture, and circumstance. Laboratory experiments with complex hormones have shown only mild and inconsistent mood changes, nothing like uncontrollable lust. Air Force researchers probably didn't know that, or didn't care. The early 1990s were full of speculation, and they were tossing ideals at a wall to see what might stick. Even if the chemistry worked, the engineering wouldn't. Chemical weapons have to be delivered as fine aerosols, microscopic droplets that drift through the air. Dispersion depends on the wind, humidity, and temperature. A 10-mile-per-hour cross breeze can carry a gas cloud a kilometer off target. Soldiers in the open would inhale wildly different doses. Some would breathe almost none. Others might get sick. Realistically, a love gas would produce confusion and nausea, not romance. But that wasn't unusual for non-lethal weapons. Many ideals of that era were equally implausible. Pentagon files describe sticky foam that could trap people in place, sound weapons that could induce nausea, and maldurants designed to smell so foul the enemy troops would flee. The aphrodisiac line was just one entry among dozens of improbable chemical dreams. When the proposal surfaced publicly, the reaction mixed humor and disbelief. Journalists asked whether the Air Force had really tried to make people gay. Late-night shows joked that the Pentagon wanted to weaponize fabulousness.
Whatever we come up with has got to be wasteful, embarrassing to the administration, and upsetting to the voters.
Holy smoke.
What have you got?
In 1994, the Pentagon explored the possibility of a non-lethal chemical weapon that would, quote, reduce enemy soldiers' combat posture by making them totally gay bones for each other.
How gay?
It doesn't say. The project was abandoned in the planning stages.
Of course it was. It would have been expensive, impractical, and offensive to both the red states and the gay or blue states.
Within the defense community, officials winced but confirmed the paperwork was authentic. They emphasized that it had never been funded, and the most brainstorms never left the proposal stage. Still, the idea was far too strange to forget. In 2007, the document even received a Nobel Peace Prize, awarded for research that first makes people laugh, then makes them think. If you actually read the entire 3-page memo, it's clear the writers weren't making a joke. They were following a pattern of government brainstorming that stretched back decades. During the Cold War, American intelligence agencies had experimented with every imaginable kind of behavior modification. The CIA's MK-Ultra program had tested LSD as a truth serum and dosed unwitting civilians. The Navy's Operation Sea Spray had sprayed bacteria over San Francisco to measure aerosol drift. The Army's Project Sunshine had secretly collected tissue samples from the dead to study nuclear fallout. The Air Force scientists in Dayton weren't working inside the same culture of experimentation. They weren't trying to be ridiculous. They were trying to be innovative. The absurdity only became visible in hindsight. Ethically, the proposal exposes a troubling mindset. It treats human desire as a switch to be manipulated, intimacy as a vulnerability to exploit. The assumption that sexuality could be turned into a weapon reflects the social basis for that time. In 1994, the U.S. military was operating under don't ask, don't tell, a policy that effectively silenced the gay service members. Within that culture, the ideal that same-sex attraction could be used to weaken an enemy made sense to someone on paper. Today, it reads as both offensive and revealing, a snapshot of how prejudice and pseudo-silence can blend into the banner of research. Could anything like it work today? Modern neuroscience gives us a definitive no. We know now attraction is distributed across brain networks, the hypothalamus, the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex. You can influence mood with drugs or hormones, but you can't command desire. Experiments with oxytocin sprays show tiny effects on trust and empathy, not romance. Even with cutting-edge tools like transcranial stimulation or optogenetics, scientists can only modulate emotion in lab animals under controlled conditions. Delivering such changes across a battlefield is completely science fiction. The only technologies that achieve large-scale behavior change today are digital, not chemical. Social media algorithms already influence attention, emotion, and decision-making more efficiently than any aerosol ever could. If the gay bomb represented the fantasy of controlling hearts through chemistry, the 21st century achieved it through code. The story of the gay bomb also teaches us how myths form. A single line in a technical memo became a global punchline. It spread because it combined taboo and absurdity in one irresistible package. It confirmed what people already suspected, that behind closed doors, governments fund bizarre projects, and scientists sometimes lose perspective on what they're talking about. The humor made it memorable, but the laughter reminded us how power and imagination can drift into moral blind spots, but nobody asked the obvious questions. Should we? In the end, the Wright Laboratory never built its aphrodisiac bomb. The document was quietly shelved, and the lab moved on to more conventional research. Yet the file lives on as a parable. It shows that even in institutions obsessed with rationality, fantasy can slip through disguised as innovation. It's the same impulse that once drove the CIA to study psychic spies in the Air Force to imagine invisibility cloaks. The gay bomb is a perfect emblem of that mindset, attempt to engineer human nature itself. When you strip away the jokes, what remains is a mirror. It reflects the fears and fantasies of a superpower trying to make war painless. It reminds us that every time humanity invents a new technology, chemical, digital, or psychological, we also invent new ways to misuse it. The real lesson of the gay bomb isn't that scientists once tried to make the soldiers fall in love. It's that the search for the control, even compassion, can become a weapon. So yes, the gay bomb was real, but only as an ideal, a footnote in a long history of military imagination. It never exploded on a battlefield, but it detonated in public consciousness, where it continues to echo. Maybe that's fitting. A bomb built from absurdity, remembered through irony, and ultimately serving as a warning that the line between science and satire is thinner than we think. And sometimes, the strangest conspiracies are the one buried in plain sight. Thanks for listening to Zero Signal Shorts. If you like this dive into the weird world of military science, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. That helps more people find the show. We drop new full-length episodes every Tuesday at 6 a.m., where we take these strange files and go even deeper. Follow us on your favorite podcast app or YouTube for bonus clips. And if you got a story you think it fits the signal, send it our way. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep your receiver tuned to Zero Signal.